Welcome everyone to our virtual meeting about the 2019 draft new transit service plan. We appreciate you joining today. I'm going to cover a few housekeeping items and introduce our speakers. My name is Cody Kratz. I'm Administrator of Digital Communications at VTA, and with me today is Jay Tyree, Senior Transportation Planner, who's working on this draft plan. Also in the room, we have Kermit Cuff, Transit Service Development Supervisor, who will be helping out with the Q&A portion of the meeting. We ask that if you have any questions, please place those into the chat window. If you're on a smartphone, that will be down at the bottom of the screen on the YouTube app where you'll get the best experience, or on a computer, it'll be off to the right of the viewing window. I'll pose those questions to Jay during the Q&A portion of the meeting. We have a really large group tuned in and a lot of people already engaging in the chat. We'll respond to as many as we can, as many questions and comments as we can during the limited time we have available. We ask that you keep those focused on the proposed plan, and we'll prioritize those comments over anything we see that might be unrelated. We'll try to get to as many as we can, though, before we have to conclude the meeting. The chat will also be documented, and all the comments and questions will be included in a report to the board and available for planners to review after this meeting in case we don't get to them during the meeting. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jay to get started.
Okay, thank you, Cody. My job here, and hello everybody. My job today is to describe the transit service plan to you, the major points of it. So let's get right into it. So this slide explains the history and why we're here today, and some background on why we're talking about a new transit service plan. So those of you involved in the Next Network planning process in 2016 and 2017 may remember a couple years of intense community engagement and outreach. We got a lot of feedback from the community. We had a couple rounds of discussion back and forth. We had several service plans, some proposals, and that all culminated in the VTA Board of Directors adopting the Next Network Plan in May of 2017. Since that time, we've basically been waiting for BART service to start at Milpitas and Berryessa in order to implement that Next Network Plan. So it's kind of been, on the shelf and ready to go, but not on the street in active service. So then fast forward to 2018, and VTA's Ad Hoc Financial Stability Committee convened to look at VTA's long-term finances and make some structural changes to improve VTA's long-term financial outlook. That effort ended in the VTA Board of Directors in December of 2018, directing staff to modify that Next Network Plan. And I'll get into the details in the next slide here. But essentially, the direction came, and VTA staff then developed a modified Next Network Plan, which we're calling the 2019 New Transit Service Plan. That's the plan we're talking about today. We released that plan in early January, and we've been conducting outreach to the community and all of our stakeholders and our municipal partners to get their feedback on that plan. So that's why we're talking about this new service plan. So the VTA Board of Directors in December, a couple months ago, gave staff three main directions on the new transit service plan, and these are the three here on this slide. First is the board said, we can't afford the service increase that the Next Network would have been, so let's just maintain the current service level. That means the service level that's on the street today, if you were to walk outside, it's the same service level, total cost of service that we provide today in this new service plan. The second thing the board directed us to do is to focus more on ridership service and less on coverage service. And I'll get to that a little bit in a few slides here. The third thing the board said, and while you're doing all of that, minimize cuts to South County because of the history in the Next Network and the limited service already that's down there. And so as we are reorienting service throughout the network, we need to minimize the cuts in South County. So that first bit of direction to maintain today's service level, I just want to reiterate with this slide here. This is VTA's total cost of service among the three plans that we're really talking about here. One is the current service, that's the service that's out on the street today. The middle there is the Next Network Plan that would have been an increase of $15 million per year from $360 to $375 million. And then the new service plan, the draft 2019 new transit service plan that we're talking about today, that maintains the total cost of service at $360 million. That's the same as today's service. You can also see there the transition from 70/30 ridership coverage today to 90/10, which actually is my next slide. So I'm going to explain that a little bit better. This slide here shows the ridership coverage balance. Those of you that remember from the next network process probably remember this concept here. Essentially, there are two types of transit routes. There are ridership routes that are ridership focused, and their sole purpose is to carry the most riders possible. These routes often operate along dense urban arterials with a lot of street activity. You know, people can cross the street easily. They're essentially those are the full buses. They're routes that we expect high ridership from. There are other routes that exist for purposes other than ridership, and we call those coverage routes. The purpose of those routes can be anything from serving a senior center or serving an area that wouldn't otherwise have service, or service to a school, or those kind of things where the service may be critical and very important, and indeed in VTA's goal to serve, but the bottom line is they are low ridership routes. So that's the ridership and coverage balance here. And on the screen here, the chart shows the VTA currently spends about 70% of our resources on ridership routes and 30% on coverage routes. So that direction from the VTA board in December is to reallocate more resources from coverage to ridership to achieve a 90/10 balance. So you can see there's significant reductions in the amount of service that we provide that is low ridership, and in return, we are beefing up routes in areas that are transit supportive that have high ridership. So when we did outreach for 2 years, 2016 and 2017, when we got 10,000 points of feedback from the community for the next network process, in this plan, we really wanted to utilize all of that feedback that we got from the community. So this plan does reflect all of the things that the community as a whole told us. Things like, we really want routes to be more frequent. Waiting for the bus is just terrible, and it's not a high ridership strategy. We're willing to reallocate service from coverage to ridership in order to make that happen. So we wanted to emphasize that outreach and the feedback that we got from the community has been very valuable in developing this plan. So the feedback that we'd like from you now in this 2-month period of outreach, we really just kind of want to know what you like about the plan and what you don't like. So all the details, what routes you would restore, what routes you would eliminate, that kind of thing, where you travel. Any of the details would be very useful for us in this from a service planning perspective, so we can improve the network from a draft stage to a final stage. So our role as VTA staff is really threefold. First is to explain the proposal. I know these things can be kind of complicated, so we're hoping that this webinar, for example, is one way in my slides to help explain this complicated proposal to you so you can understand what's in it. Second is my role is to pass your feedback on to the VTA Board of Directors, because ultimately it's the Board of Directors that makes the final decision on what the transit network is going to look like. And so, you know, if we get a lot of votes for a certain service in a certain area, for example, that's feedback I can pass along to the board so they can consider that as they make their decision. And then finally, VTA staff are also going to take your feedback to, like I said earlier, revise this draft plan and turn it into the final plan that goes forward to the VTA board. So to describe the major points of the new transit service plan, this slide here shows the light rail network as we're proposing. Those of you that are involved in the next network process, this is going to look very familiar. Essentially, there are 4 colored lines in our next network transit service plan: the blue, green, orange, and purple line. For the most significant new thing in the next network service plan for light rail was the addition of a new line, completely new line for us. That's the orange line across the top there from Mountain View to Milpitas, BART Station over to Alum Rock, 1-seat ride. So that's a new line and extra service and a lot more service for us. And so in order to do that, some trims had to be made elsewhere in the system. But actually the green line, before I go to the others, the green line is the same in this proposal as it is and was in the next network plan. That's a line from Old Ironsides to Winchester. But the blue line, which currently provides service from Alum Rock to Santa Teresa, that's going to be shortened back to Bay Point. So it saves us quite a bit of money from shortening that back to Bay Point instead of out to Alum Rock and providing those 2 lines of service on that corridor. The other change that we're proposing is the purple line that currently provides service between Almaden Station, Oak Ridge Station, and Ohlone Chenoweth Station. That we are proposing to eliminate as a rail service and replace it with a bus line that serves those 3 stations, the same stations and basically the same times of the day. But replacing it with a bus line saves quite a bit of operating money, because bus is half the operating cost per hour as rail. On the bus side, there are a number of improvements actually to the frequent network. And these improvements are shown here on this slide. There are 5 routes that get improved, meaning extra frequent service on these, more trips that go longer, et cetera, that kind of thing. There may not seem like many improvements, just the 5, but these are very significant and very impactful improvements that we think will have tremendous increases in ridership on these. So these are improvements, again, from that 90-10 shift to 90-10 ridership coverage balance. On the reduction side for bus, there are a number of reductions, and I'm not going to try to explain all of them individually. We're happy to take questions here at the end. But the cuts, well, the first thing to realize about the cuts is they're all coverage cuts. So these are on that coverage side of things. These are low ridership routes or low ridership trips on routes that don't carry many folks, so minimizing the impacts of the cuts. There's some routes that go away entirely. Some routes have weekend service frequency reductions. Some routes, for example, or many of them on the right-hand side there, these are things like where we wanted the route to go to midnight, but we're going to pull that back and we're going to end the route at 11 p.m. So it's cutting an hour of service off of some routes, that kind of thing. And then this is another slide of the cuts. Some routes get changed. Their route alignments will change, so we'll eliminate some deviations in order to save money. On the right-hand side of the screen there is the changes to the express bus program. Many of you might know that after we implement this new service plan, there's 9, in the next network plan, there were 9 proposed express bus routes. VTA currently spends $10 million a year to provide that service. In this new plan, we are proposing to cut that service level in half. So 4 of the routes would go away entirely, and then 4 other routes have some trips eliminated from them. So this slide here shows the kind of the overview of what we're doing as far as community engagement these couple months. There's been 5 meetings. We've already had community meetings, VTA hosted community meetings throughout the county. We have 1 more coming up next week, I believe. We're having this online live meeting. We have a detailed website, newtransitplan.vta.org, where folks can go to get all the detail for every route and every proposal here. We have printed materials on the buses and the trains for riders to grab a copy of that, and there's a map there of the new proposal to see how that might affect them. And then we're doing features on VTA's website and getting a good discussion area going on those as well. So what is next? To my last slide here. After the January and February engagement periods, VTA staff will take March to revise the plan based on that community engagement and feedback that we're hearing. Then the final plan is going to go to VTA's committees in April and VTA's full board for adoption in May. The adoption in May gives VTA staff time over the summer to do everything that's necessary to prepare to implement that plan. That includes things like ordering bus stop signs and ordering new passenger materials and training ambassadors and operators, that kind of thing, so that we are ready for day 1 of service. And I'll reiterate, day 1 of service is whenever BART service opens at Milpitas and Berryessa. So anytime between October or December of this year, we have to be ready for that service. So those are my slides to try to explain the new transit service plan proposal. I'm now going to hand it back to Cody to moderate our discussion.
Thank you everyone for all of the questions and comments in the chat. It's been very lively in there. We are doing our best to capture and in many cases summarize questions that many people have. The first thing I want to do is ask Jay to speak to a question that Gregory had about paratransit, which I believe is not within the scope of what we're going to get into detail on today, but maybe you can speak to that a bit.
Great question. The Paratransit Impact, so VTA provides VTA access paratransit service within a certain distance of our fixed route light rail fixed route transit network. So that's light rail and bus. And when we change the kind of the envelope or where service operates, that can potentially have an impact on paratransit service. We have gathered data for all of the VTA access paratransit trips that were taken over the year of 2018, the entire calendar year of trips. And we're in the process right now of analyzing the number of trips that would be impacted by this proposal. So I don't have numbers to share with you yet. That full report, we're going to complete that in March, and it's going to be part of the plan as it goes to the report will be part of the plan as it goes to the VTA committees and also the VTA board. And specifically, we are presenting that data to the Committee for Transit Mobility and Accessibility, I think it's CTMA, in March. So look forward for that data in the future.
Thank you, Jay. And I think a very common theme here and a lot of interest is focused on South County and the express routes. So if you don't mind, perhaps we could do a bit of a deeper dive on the express routes. And we did anticipate that there would be a lot of questions on that. So we have some additional slides that Jay could use if that's helpful. We'll go ahead and jump to that next.
Okay, just hang tight here while I go to the slide that I want. Queued up a lot of background slides for you based on the questions that we thought might come. I'll talk about the Express program as a whole, just to give you a sense of how it functionally works for us and the performance that we get from it. This slide here shows some numbers on the Express bus program compared to VTA's local bus. You can see here that, the Express buses on average carry about 15 folks per trip, and that's actually pretty good. That's about a person in every other seat. So they're 42% full. They're not empty. They're not unproductive as far as people in seats. The problem, however, comes in when you compare the amount of service that we have to provide in order to carry those riders, because it's quite inefficient. And those are the numbers across the bottom here, where you can see the boardings per hour for the program is 6.3 boardings an hour. That's just a fraction of the system, the local bus networks, 20 boardings an hour. Very low fare box recovery at 3% and a very high cost per boarding of $33. So several times worse than VTA's local bus network. And that's really for three reasons. One is that these are long distance trips that don't turn over many seats. Folks will, for example, they'll get on in Gilroy and Morgan Hill, and they all get on the bus, and then the bus takes them a long distance and drops them all off at work. And there's no turnover, or not much, almost none, on the seats. Compare that to a local bus like the VTA's 22, which will go from Eastridge to Palo Alto, and each seat will turn over 5, 6, 10 times over the course of that route. And so that's one reason why the express style of service is just structurally very difficult for a higher performance. The second is there's a lot of deadhead time in these routes. What that means is it takes us a lot of time to pull out in and out buses from the yard. So a bus, for example, will pull out from a yard, travel down to Gilroy, and that takes a while. It'll make the one revenue trip up to Palo Alto, and then it'll have to, drive somewhere back to the yard or drive to a school trip. So there's a lot of that what we call non-revenue time involved. And then finally, the last reason is these trips are one-way service. Essentially, we know the kind of the travel patterns in the county. Everybody travels north, for example, in the morning and south in the PM. So we can't, use the bus in both directions and have it go back and forth like we do in all of our other routes. So we get one trip out of these express routes. So for those three reasons, those kind of fall into why the express program as a whole is quite unproductive for us. And so when we got the direction to reduce the amount of coverage service, these are the worst performing routes in the system as far as productivity on the boardings per hour side. None of them meet our board adopted minimum of 15 boardings per hour. In fact, all of them are less than 10. So we did have to make some adjustments to the express routes in South County. Kermit, do you actually want to go and walk through the 3 routes in South County, express routes?
The express routes, yes. We have the 121 to Moffett Park, 168 to downtown San Jose, Diridon, and then the 185 to Mountain View. 185 was started a couple of years ago. Hasn't done well. We haven't gotten many passengers on it. It's slowly risen, but it's still, we have one trip that has 2 people on it, one trip that has 6 people on it, and so on the average, so it hasn't done very well. We have gotten some positive suggestions though, in terms of like if you have to discontinue that, take the 121 and extend a couple trips to Mountain View, things like that. So those are things we'll definitely be taking a look at as we go through the whole plan. The expresses is one of the things that the issues that is, I guess, one of the biggest issues that we're facing. We originally had wanted to do a whole express study first until the board told us to cut 15 million out of our next network, and so something that still needs to be worked on quite a bit further. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify on this slide, the numbers in black are the numbers for the express bus program as a whole, those 9 routes, and the numbers in the boxes in blue are the same performance numbers, but for VTA's local bus network.
Thank you, Jay and Kermit. Hopefully that answered the questions related to the South County Express routes. For those of you dropping comments in who would really like to see those routes stay, as Kermit mentioned, we're seeing some of the ideas about combining routes. We appreciate all of that. We're going to be documenting all of these comments, and after this meeting, they'll be considered along with all the other comments we've received as Jay and the team develop a final plan to present to the board of directors. So rest assured that is all being captured. There are a couple of questions here, Jay. One that I think is a bit more general, related to the local routes and the express routes we are looking at reductions for. Eugene asks why they have low ridership, what the reason is for that. Do you mind explaining a bit about what you've found in your analysis?
That's a good question as well. So the ridership and coverage balance gets at the purpose of individual transit routes, but it also gets at the areas in which they serve. So for example, one area that's been very difficult for us to serve with fixed route bus for a long time has been the East Hills, Route 45, for many of you that might be familiar with it. This is a route that has had low productivity for a long time and is proposed for elimination in the next network plan and in this plan as well. And the reasons for that are, we like to, in the transit planning world, we like to think of transit service as a 3-legged stool for success and high ridership. One of those legs is the transit service itself. So how easy to use and understand is the service. And that's, so the one of the legs is transit. And so that's how good the service itself is. But the other 2 legs that are just as important to success of a route are things like, one of them is the land use that route will serve. This is things like density. How dense is the area? How many people and jobs are going to be served by that route? And then, what kind of environment that route provides service in. The third thing is the street grid itself. This gets more at what it feels like to be a pedestrian on the street and wait for the bus, for example, in that area. Sometimes you can't cross the street on some streets, and so that's for that reason that route is going to fail on that leg. So the street grid has a lot to do with transit service as well, or the success. And so those 3 things all have to work together to provide high ridership transit. And so in areas like the 45, there's simply not enough density. There's simply not the street grid is just not designed for people. It's designed for cars. And so no matter what service we put out there, it's low ridership service.
Thank you, Jay. There's also a question from Martha, or comment really, about how longer walks impact seniors or perhaps others who might have a harder time walking. Do you mind speaking a bit to what the plan, how the plan accounts for that?
Sure, that's a good question as well. And we wanted to get at this issue a lot in the next network. And so we asked a lot of questions and feedback on walking distance versus transit speed when we asked for your feedback. And I want to emphasize there's no right answer for this. There's always going to be a trade-off for walking distance and transit speed. What we heard from folks in general was that they're willing to walk longer to transit in general, again, if it was faster, if that transit was faster. For example, like a rapid service like the 522, they really like the idea that service can take them faster to where they're going in longer distances. It's the same idea with Caltrain service or BART service, for example. Folks are willing to walk longer to those style of services because they get them farther faster. And so the plan doesn't really, choose a distance that folks are willing to walk. It really tries to accommodate folks that do want to walk farther to faster transit in corridors that can support it. So we have two new rapid routes in the network, 523 and the 500, for folks that do want to walk farther and faster to faster transit. Excuse me. So there's another program we're just launching called the Fast Transit Program, which we're going to get into the placement of bus stops. And so this is going to come up again during that project as we look to make sure that our bus stops are in the right place so that even folks that are, for example, seniors that can't walk as far, they can still access our service.
Thank you, Jay. I wanted to cover a few more general comments. There were some questions about different ways that employers could share the cost of express buses. There was a question about exploring ride sharing, and I just wanted to flag, we might not be able to answer those questions here, but rest assured that our planning department, our marketing department, everyone's looking closely at all kinds of ideas like that. So those are definitely part of the overall consideration if they're not a part of this plan. There was also a question from Callie about the 2016 Measure B money, which is now available. A portion of that was focused on transit operations. And the information I have is that 14 to 15 million a year has been included in the next operating budget. So that is definitely accounted for. Wanted to ask Jay and Kermit to dive into, for a while here, some specific route numbers that I saw coming up in the discussion here. Just real quickly go over a few of these. So first of all, Route 63, someone was commenting about how the removal of that route leaves no other buses near the place where they currently board. So perhaps we could take a look at the map and take a close look at that area there and speak to the market there.
Yeah, I'm going to pull up the map while Kermit will speak to this one.
Sure. Yeah, we had a very productive meeting in Almaden last night and got a lot of very good constructive ideas. And I think the challenge is that our direction from the board is to basically reduce the coverage service. And even when we keep coverage service, it needs to meet a minimum of 15 passengers per hour. And there are lines such as the southern end of the 63, for example, and line 13, for example, in the Almaden area, that are far below that 15 passengers an hour today. And that's something that, again, like from the direction of the board of directors, we're supposed to address that and not let empty buses run. So that's the challenge that we face too. And, but in the Almaden area, we're looking at a number of different ideas. Like I said, last night's meeting was great. Had some very good constructive ideas of how to restructure things, including line 13, the 64, the 63, and the Almaden Light Rail, or a substitute bus service, and different combinations thereof. So we're definitely working on alternatives there.
There was a question also about Route 10, and I think the question was what time it would start. And I just want to make sure we're clear on what's changing regarding Route 10, and I think specifically service to the airport, some of the major destinations Route 10 hits.
But Route 10 just gets absorbed into Route 60. It would still have the same basic hours now. It would start around 5 a.m. and go to midnight. So it'll be a little bit later than today's 10 operates. The good thing is while it stays 15 on weekdays, it goes to 20 minutes on weekends, which is currently 30. So, and instead of just having to get it at Santa Clara, now you can catch it at Valley Fair, Winchester. It'll be a much longer route going to Milpitas BART. So.
Thanks, Kermit. And I hope that answers your question about Route 10. Mary had a question about Routes 61 and 62 serving Valley Med, or rather the comment just wanting to make sure that Valley Med is going to be well served by those routes in the new plan. Speak to that.
Yeah, the 61, 62, for the bulk of it really hasn't changed. Just the frequency gets better in the evening and on weekends. We're getting rid of the number 62, but the service is still there. There'll be 15-minute service from Berryessa BART all the way down to like the Bascom Union area where they split. Since we don't have a turnaround at Good Sam, one goes down Union, one goes down Bascom, but then there'll still be combined 15-minute service up past Valley Medical Center and on to Berryessa BART. And then the buses that continue past Berryessa BART to Sierra Piedmont would be every half hour.
Thank you. And we're going to keep going with the route-specific questions here. The new Route 21 combines 35 and 32. And there was a commenter that was asking for some more clarification on how exactly that's going to work.
Yeah, so essentially the line 35 doesn't change. And for Sherry on San Antonio Circle, you're safe. We're not changing. We're going to keep that the way it is today. So the line 35 essentially stays the same. What changes is once you get to downtown Mountain View, it will then continue up Moffett Boulevard, make a right on Middlefield, and sort of take over the 32 at that point. Now there are some changes to the 32 route, but essentially they just get combined. But the service hours and the frequency on what's the 35 today don't change. It'll be the same.
Thanks, Kermit. The next question relates to 44 and 47, routes 44 and 47. Hoping to talk a bit about how those are combined and changed.
Sure. 44 and 47 are really just a loop, like a loop route. We have a similar thing in Gilroy with 84, 85. So one route will leave the Milpitas BART station, go up Park Victoria, out Park Victoria around Calaveras to the McCarthy Ranch area, and then it'll continue down as Route 44 to get to light rail quicker. Because currently the 47 goes out to McCarthy Ranch, but then you have to go all the way back around to get there. This will basically function as a loop. So there'll be buses operating kind of in both directions. So the 47 will turn into the 44, for example, and just the vice versa.
So since Kermit mentioned Gilroy, there was a request to look closely at the new Gilroy routes. So we'll go ahead and take a close look at that since it's a similar kind of configuration.
Right. In Gilroy, the local service it's being renumbered here, but the local service stays very similar to what it does today. It's just that we're kind of closing the loop at the top. Currently, we have 3 routes in Gilroy. This goes to 2, but it's the same amount of, it's covering the same area. It's just that we're closing the loop at the top, where now you'll instead of going up to St. Louis Hospital and the shopping and have to come all the way back down, you can also go across into the other side of Gilroy and connect with line 68 quicker. So other than that, the routing and the Gavilan College is still the same. The big increase to Gilroy is that the 68 will go to every 15 minutes all day. Now, currently it's 15 just in the peak hours. Originally, we were going to have it at 30. Now it'll go to 15 for the whole day down to Gilroy. And that's one of the improvements that Jay was mentioning earlier.
So as we continue to go through a few more specific routes, I saw a request from Cindy to provide a summary of all the routes that will be discontinued, so people don't have to work too hard finding the proposal. The best place to go and find all of this is at newtransitplan.vta.org. And the link to that is in all of the messages we've been sending out, and is also in the slides, which, to answer another question, we will provide after the presentation. I'll put a link to those in the YouTube description. And when we send out an email afterwards, there will be a link to download Jay's slides here. There it is on the board there. So there's a lot of detail in there that we may not be able to cover here today, but if you're looking for a summary of them all, as well as all the maps that you're seeing here, all of that is on the website. A few more route specific questions. First of all, wanted to look at Route 64 and any changes that are proposed for that. Could we confirm?
Yeah, on Route 64, there's a couple of changes. One of them is up in sort of the downtown area, San Jose, where currently the route goes on San Fernando to 6th and 7th, then turns right on Santa Clara to 13th. It would stay on 6th and 7th up to Julian and go out. Fairly minor change in the San Jose State area. On the southern end of the 64 toward Almaden, the current proposal is to instead of ending at the Almaden Light Rail Station, is to extend it further south to Almaden and Camden. Again, the whole Almaden area is one we're taking a lot of closer look at to find the best combination of routes and things that'll cover more of the destinations and in a cost-effective manner. So that's definitely a work in progress.
And one more quick trip to South County. There was a question about Express 168. Speak to what's proposed to change regarding Route 168.
So 168, the route would stay the same because of what Jay had mentioned earlier and having to reduce the high cost of the express. The proposal is to go from 7 trips to 5 trips. We haven't identified specific trips. It's more of a concept. And it's the same with the 121. We would keep 6 trips of the current 9. What we would do on those is like in the case of the 121, we work with the commute coordinators. We would do a passenger survey after this plan is implemented after this plan is approved and before it's implemented, we would do a passenger survey and say, hey, we're only going to have this many trips. What time do you want to get to work and what time do you want to leave, that kind of thing, and develop the schedule that would benefit the most or have the least impact, on people.
And there was a question about Route 22, specifically asking, confirming that Route 22 is considered to be a high ridership route. And just have Jay clarify that.
So that's a good question because 22 is actually on the list of some cuts, right? And so how could it be a high ridership route, one of our best, in fact, but yet still be on the some trips on the chopping block? And this gets at kind of the nuances of service planning, where throughout the course of a day, peak hour trips, for example, are great. Midday trips are great. Even evening trips are great in the 22. But as you get to the midnight trips and the overnight trips, what we call owl service, those are very low productivity. So those resources are coverage resources. They are not there for high ridership, and they're not returning a lot of riders or carrying a lot of riders for us. And so that's one place that we do have to make some cutbacks on the 22, just because those trips are coverage trips, low ridership trips. And I do want to emphasize that when we're making these cuts from coverage side, the resources are being redirected to areas that are higher ridership. So the question is not whether it's good service or not, because we would love to provide the service even on the coverage side everywhere. But the question is, can we use those same dollars and carry 3 or 4 or 5 times as many people somewhere else that is more transit supportive and more ridership oriented?
So there were also some questions about the blue line, and we want to make sure we speak to that because that is a pretty significant change proposed here. Kermit, you want to take that one?
Sure. On the light rail, our original plan was to have the blue line continue as it does today to Alum Rock and put in the orange line. So we'd have like 2 lines on that section hitting the BART station in Milpitas with having to reduce 15 million out of the combined bus rail budget. That was sort of a compromise we felt we had to make if we had left the whole line there as it is, we would have had to make major cuts in the bus system, which we were really uncomfortable with. And so we ended up proposing to terminate the blue line at Bay Point. And just so everyone understands, there would be a 3-minute sort of time transfer there where the orange lines would come in both directions at the same time. The blue line would get in 3 minutes before those 2 trains come and then leave 3 minutes after. So it wouldn't be a long transfer. It'd be a fairly close transfer. It would be, so several people said, well, can't you just turn the train around at Milpitas BART? We would love to, but there's just it's on an elevated structure. They've looked at it and there's really no way to put in like a turnaround at that place. So once you go beyond Bay Point, other than like in an emergency situation, you pretty much have to go all the way to the end of the line.
So there's a question from Kelly about the Almaden line, the purple line that would no longer be utilized. Jay, could you speak to the plans for that area of the light rail system?
It's essentially the same service that's provided by the Almaden, what we call the Almaden line today, between Almaden, Oak Ridge, and Ohlone Chenoweth. The rail service, the rail stations would remain, the rail tracks would remain. We would continue to use those tracks. Actually, we have some great need for those as like training tracks for our operators and storage tracks for when we need to store trains to get them into quick service on special event days. So we'd still use the rail infrastructure there. But the service that the passengers would use would essentially be on the bus side of the stations, where the bus would provide service between the 3 stations, Almaden, Oak Ridge, and Ohlone Chenoweth. And that bus service is every 30 minutes, basically in the same hours of service that we operate the light rail line today.
So I saw another question from Martha about, really a comment about ensuring that we serve hospitals. And I wanted to ask Jay to speak a bit about how the next network plan and this draft proposal approach service to hospitals and other different kinds of medical centers. And in general, just what destinations are focal points as trip generators in the plan.
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Many of the hospitals and medical centers throughout the county tend to be some of our best areas because they're located on corridors that are great and easy for us to serve because they're transit supportive corridors. And the service on these is actually getting a lot better in the new plan. So I'm thinking things like Regional Medical Center, Valley Med, El Camino Hospital in Los Gatos, we're maintaining service there. There's the VA hospital in Palo Alto with service from the 89. So when we are looking at these routes and we have the difficult task of deciding where we have to make reductions, we always try to avoid making cuts in areas or in routes that serve hospitals. So for example, O'Connor Hospital is a very difficult hospital to serve because it's not on the main corridor. It's kind of tucked away. And so it's always going to be a very difficult and low ridership service for us, but we specifically are keeping that service in there because of the hospital and the great need there. And we do the same thing for places like senior centers and community centers and such. You know, at the end of the day, though, the routes still have to meet minimum productivity guidelines because we are talking about public money from, you know, taxpayers all over the county that are paying for this service, and you know, it has to actually carry people.
Thank you. Another detailed question regarding 71 and 70 in the Snell and Capitol area. Someone wanted to just clarify exactly what's going to be happening there if Route 71 is replacing 70 in that vicinity.
Yes, essentially Route 71 is replacing Route 70, just like you said, Cody. The 71 will go from Capitol Station to East Ridge and then continue up as it does today up along White Road up to Milpitas Spark.
Thank you. And returning back to the purple line conversation, there's a question from Callie about whether the new bus that would be put in place, whether that proposed bus would have timed transfers to the blue line.
Yes, it would. Even the current line, like what we do is when, depending on the arrival times of the northbound and southbound trains at Chenoweth and the windows of those, whatever that window is, we'll put the trains in between those, and the buses would be the same. So if a bus went south, we would want to leave ideally after both trains have come through, but especially the southbound train. And then when it returned, we'd want it to get in there before both trains, ideally, but especially before the northbound train. So yes, they would be timed for that.
Okay, if you have any more specific route questions like we've been covering just now, please make sure you get those in. We're getting close to needing to end the webinar. There is one question from Cindy regarding the overall hours for bus drivers. And I just wanted to have Jay kind of maybe come back to the beginning point regarding the total cost of service and just explain what would be happening with overall bus service hours, or I should say bus and light rail transit operator service hours.
Okay, that's a great question as well. Let me reiterate that the total amount of hours, total amount of service is the same. So it's the $360 million per year in the current service and $360 million a year in the proposed plan. So the total number of operators doesn't change. What does change is that the number of bus operators would go down and the number of rail operators would go up. So it's just reallocating between the two.
Okay, thank you, Jay. And thank you again to everyone for all of these questions. I'm going to look through notes and make sure that we are answering any really specific questions regarding the proposal and changes to specific routes. Once again, we definitely also have other opportunities for you to provide input. If you have any comments that you are leaving here that we haven't really gotten to or addressed during this virtual meeting, make sure you go to the website that we shared and you can drop a comment in there in your own words. Please definitely take the time to do that. If you have any questions we haven't answered, please email community.outreach@vta.org. There were a couple of questions that Kermit wanted to answer related to Route 89, I believe.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, there's a couple of people mentioned with the 88 not going to the VA hospital. The 89 is a much higher ridership route than 88 today, going between the California Avenue area and El Camino and the train station and over to the research park. And that would stay the same as it is today. We'd still run that all day. And in the peak hours, it extends up to Hillview and Rastradero. So the service to the VA hospital would still be there on line 89 as it is today.
Thanks for catching that, Kermit. And another question that we missed earlier on was related to Route 330. So the limited 330, and potentially you could just speak a bit to all of the limited routes, what's proposed to happen there, explain a bit about the reasoning for that.
Yeah, that's a great question as well. The limited routes that we provide today, they're a little bit of a hybrid between express and local service. They serve longer distance trips, and they tend to go on expressways and some freeways. And those routes, again, similar to the express program, those are some of our lowest ridership routes. And so at the end of the day, when we have to cut coverage service and reallocate those resources elsewhere, the limited routes have to go. They serve places like San Tomas or Lawrence Expressway, areas that are actually very, very difficult for us to serve with transit because they're not designed for people. They're designed for cars. And, imagine crossing the street on those streets, or, how safe it might feel to wait there. So again, low ridership routes had to be cut.
We also got a couple of questions about the line 42, and there's a southern part of the route that doesn't pick up too many people now. They're asking, couldn't we run line 68 over there to cover that area, like the area of Monterey and Menard? The difficulty with that is, like, I totally sympathize with losing service in an area, and that's a very difficult thing. But to take a route like the 68, and then, like this says, it has 30 people on it, and then take everyone way over off to somewhere and to serve an area, and then come all the way back is kind of a ridership killer right there. As far as this is where you're helping a couple people at that stop, but inconveniencing the 30 that are trying to get through. And so that'd be a different. It's certainly worth considering, but those are the kind of things we have to look at. Is it really worth taking all those people on the 68 on a scenic tour versus the couple of people that are waiting? So that's a good kind of challenge that we face, because I saw some of the comments about that.
There was a question about timing, and I just wanted to clarify. Maybe we can go back to the slide Jay had about the schedule here, just to clarify expectations here. Oh, we went past it, but we'll go back to it. Jay, could you just speak to when these changes would be expected to go into effect? And there were also a lot of questions regarding the BART service opening.
Sure. Yeah, so please continue to get us your feedback through the end of February. We're looking for as much feedback as we can, but unfortunately, because of the fast accelerated schedule that we have to work with here, we have to close feedback off at the end of the month. We'll take March to revise the plan, and it's going to the committees in April and May. So that's where, the final plan will be released to the public. This service, nothing would change. So today's service will remain in effect until BART service opens. So this new plan, we're not going to eliminate any routes or change any routes until this new plan goes into effect when day one of BART service. And I don't know any more inside information on the BART opening date. We are projecting between October and December of later this year.
Thank you, Jay and Kermit, and to everyone who's been tuning in. There's one actually final specific question I was going to ask Jay and Kermit to speak to. So in South County, there are a couple of hospitals. You were talking about the hospitals in the northern part of the county, the central part of the county. I just want to speak to coverage to those destinations, as well as the social services agency in Gilroy. Question about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. We had a lot of discussion with South County folks, residents, and the cities down there in the next network plan, both with regard to the hospitals and the social service agency. Unfortunately, the social service agency is in a place that is just impossible to serve with high ridership transit. And so it's not a place that we're going to be able to serve with front door service. Currently today, actually, a lot of folks have made their own trail in the dirt to the 68 because the 68 is so much better service anyways. And so we actually think that the 68 being improved dramatically under this plan, where it's going to be 15-minute service all day on weekdays, that'll actually be a huge net gain for them. And then the hospitals, can you speak to the hospital?
Yeah, and in terms of the hospital, like it gets a little better for the St. Louis Hospital because you'll now be able to get it from the other side of Gilroy too. I said currently, we mentioned this before, but currently you have to go to the transit center and then come all the way up through the outlets to get there. Now you'll be able to come from the other side of Gilroy, the west side of Gilroy, and go across to go to St. Louis. So the access will be a little better to and from the hospital as it is today.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We are at time. Apologize if we didn't get to answer any of your questions or directly respond to any of your comments. But again, please know that we're going to be saving all of these comments. We'll be reviewing them. If you would like, you can email community.outreach@vta.org. That's on the screen now. You can also go to newtransitplan.vta.org to get information and go to the comment page to drop in a comment specifically about the route or routes you care about. We ask that you please share this webinar, this virtual meeting link afterwards. If you found it helpful, you can email it, tweet it, share it with your neighborhood association, friends, family, colleagues. We appreciate you helping us to spread the word. It'll be archived at the exact same link that you're viewing it at right now. We also appreciate feedback after viewing the virtual meeting. There will be a survey in the YouTube description, and we'll also go ahead and email that out soon when we share the slides. So thank you for joining us, and have a nice day.